It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Journey. I always say this is a special show, but this is a special show because I've got just a special guest, Susan Ford Bales, who is the daughter of Betty Ford and former President Gerald Ford. And I heard her speak at the NAATP conference a couple of months ago, where you talked about the book that you co-wrote, right, with the other author? It was co-written?
I wrote the foreword.
Right, and also
lots of the research.
And I was really impressed. But before that, a couple of months before that, I'd been to a Michigan alumni event, and I'd heard the story about your dad and Willis Ward, who was an African-American player at Michigan at a time when being an African-American athlete wasn't a particularly popular thing, and he was a good friend of your dad's, and I think until the day that he passed away. And also was your dad's, from what I read, was your dad's roommate when the team traveled. So, and I sort of, before we started to record, I sort of told you I had a bit of a soft spot for your dad after hearing that story. It reminded me a lot of my own dad. And as I also share with you, that the audience never gets to see this Michigan flag in my office, but on one side of the office is a photograph of my dad, and he keeps an eye on me. And on the other side is the flag. So everybody knows I'm a Wolverine. If they didn't already know that, it's not that I'm shy about it. So I'll share one little story, then we'll start to talk. But my father. I came here from England in '87. I ended up going to Ann Arbor. I actually went to visit a friend up there and just fell in love with the place. But my father, who knew nothing about college football, knew very quickly that I was passionate about Michigan football. So I get emotional talking about my dad, a bit like you do. And he used to keep check of the score, and if the team lost, he'd call me up and say, "What happened to your team? What's going on?" But then every year, at the end of every season, he would ask me one question, and it would be the same question every year. And he'd say, "So, you guys going to the Rose Bowl this year?" He didn't know what the Rose Bowl was, but he knew that it was important to me. So I thought I'd share that with you. So
do you think we're going to the Rose Bowl this year?
I don't know. The first two games we didn't look very good, but I'm an eternal optimist, and I want to believe that we can win a national championship with Jim Harbaugh, because he bleeds maize and blue, maybe as much as your dad did. I mean, so yep. I want to see him win a national championship. I do. I want to see him do it for Michigan, so, as opposed to anybody else doing it. So I hope that happens. So I know there was a lot of jumping up and down about getting rid of him at the end of the year, and I don't think that's the answer. I think that Jim Harbaugh hates losing as much as anybody else does, especially when Michigan loses. So I don't think getting rid of him is the answer. I think he deeply cares and loves Michigan. So with that said, so I want to know something. So I heard you speak, and so I want to talk about, so you're the daughter of a former president, but the whole sort of backstory behind this was really incredible, because your father was, I know he served in the military, and then I guess he had an opportunity to run for Congress, and was a congressman from Detroit, right?
He was a congressman from Western Michigan, the Grand Rapids area, not Detroit area. Okay,
so, and then the whole Watergate scandal took place, and the next thing you know, he's the vice president of the United States. That's crazy.
You got to go back even another step. He was a congressman for 25 years before he even became vice president. And the reason he became vice president is Spiro Agnew resigned as vice president. And so Carl Albert and Tip O'Neill and all of those people went to Richard Nixon and said, "You've got to pick Jerry Ford," because Jerry Ford was not Nixon's pick for vice president. But they all admitted that because he had been in the House and the Senate and been on the Hill for so long, is that he had what Nixon needed to, he worked both sides of the aisle, basically.
Well, by the way,
then Nixon resigns and he becomes president.
So what was that like? I mean, he goes from being a member of Congress, long-standing member of Congress, and next thing you know, he's vice president of the United States. What was that like in your home with your mom and your dad? And
well, first of all, it was very different, because I was raised in Washington. I was not raised in Michigan, and so I grew up with all the other congressmen's kids and senators' kids, and we were just normal kids in public schools. I went to public schools. But then it got to be high school, and I ended up going to a private girls' school where I was a boarder because I'm the fourth of four children. So I'm the baby and the only girl. And I think my parents were pretty tired by the time I came along. So they shipped me off to boarding school. And so all of a sudden I got Secret Service agents. Well, that really upset my apple cart as far as my social life. And so I had
I'm sure that
to,
wasn't good for the dating life. If your father ever wanted to keep a track of you, who you were dating, now he had a way of doing it.
That's exactly right. I mean, he didn't have to stay up for me because he could just read the logbook and find out where I'd been and what I was doing and what time I got home. It really hampered my social life.
Okay, so I understand he was vice president for about 9 months. Is that right? And then he became president.
Resigned, and we didn't even move into the White House right away. It was about 10 days before we moved into the White House because they had to move all of the Nixon's family's things out. So we continued to live in our house in Alexandria, and my dad would commute to the White House at the Oval Office every day for about 10 days.
I saw a great photograph when you did the when you spoke at the NAATP conference. There was a photograph of your dad sitting at the kitchen table, and basically it was like your kitchen became like a little White House. Like he was literally running the White House out of your kitchen.
Well, he was. And, he was probably toasting his English muffin or cutting his grapefruit because my mother was not an early riser and my dad was an early riser. So my dad would get up and fix his own breakfast and read the newspaper in peace and quiet before he got in the car to head over to the White House. So he was a pretty simple, ordinary man.
I know. That's what struck me about, reading about him and hearing about him. I'm like, he just seems like the kind of guy you'd have next door living to you. He just happened to become president.
Well, it is. And that's pretty much the way our whole family is. I mean, I live in Texas now, and they're like, but you lived in the White House. And I said, yeah, but I have to put my pants on too. I have to do everything that everybody else does. And so there's nothing special about me. I've been to a couple of really special things, and you still have to live your life.
So you guys all move into the White House. Let's talk a little bit about your mom, because I know that was the focus of the book. And wow, what an incredible lady she was. Really amazing. A bit like, I'd say she's a bit like my mom, but she reminds me of my mom too. And so what was life like? I mean, especially for your mom, all of a sudden she's first lady. How'd that affect things?
Well, my mother was my parents were 30 and 35 when they got married. So they got married later in life for that generation, I guess is the best way. And so my mother was a working woman. She worked at Herpelsheimer's in Grand Rapids and was a model and supported herself. And so when they decided to have children, she gave up her profession and to be a stay-at-home mom. And at that point, my dad was a congressman. So she was up on the Hill working with him and giving tours to people who would come from the district and come to the Capitol. And so she would help give tours of the White House and the Capitol. And she was involved in his profession. And but she loved fashion. She got very involved in the Senate wives and the housewives did fashion shows for the Red Cross. And back in those days, they rolled bandages, which is, of course, something you don't do anymore. But she was involved in volunteer work, and that was her life. So
the sort of the thrust of the talk that you gave at the conference was your mother's battle with alcohol. So when did that begin?
Well, I have to say, I can't say there was a magic moment that happened or a day that everything changed. My parents grew up in the era of cocktails before dinner, and they would have a martini before dinner and sit on the patio or sit in the living room and talk and catch up with each other. But my mother had fallen, and I don't even know how old I was, and pinched a nerve in her neck. And so she was given painkillers. And so she took those painkillers. And if anybody has ever had serious pain in their neck or whatever, you took them. And, the doctor said to her, you know, don't let the pain get ahead of you. Always take them, which we all know is good advice, but I think she probably took it to the degree that didn't need to happen. And who knows? I mean, we don't know if my mother had the gene for addiction. As we know, that is part that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, your dad lost the election. So where did you all go to live after that?
When he lost the election, we moved to Palm Springs, and so they moved to Palm Springs. I was still in college, and they were building a house in Palm Springs, and so they rented a house while they were building the house. And she had left longtime friends in Washington, and it was just one of those things that I think she felt very lost in a city where she didn't know anybody. And dad was traveling. He was off doing, board meetings and playing golf, which, he had pretty much not played a lot of golf during his 25 years. And so I think he was trying to make up for some lost time. So it was a very lonely, lonely time. And she had pain. And, she also had doctors who didn't say no to her. And so she had lots of prescriptions and she took advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was sort of seemed to really resonate with me was, it was like she went from this high of like basically your dad became vice president, then president, and they were in the White House for, I think, was it 2.5 years? Am I right about that? And
right.
then all of a sudden it was all over. I mean, it had to be emotionally just devastating for your mom. It had to be.
Well, I'm sure it was. I never spent any time talking to her about it. I can only, read her book and her words and try and comprehend what, is out there. If it was me, yes, absolutely. I mean, you've gone from one lifestyle to another. They were busy writing books. They were busy building a house. She was busy doing breast cancer work because, she was a breast cancer survivor. She had plenty of things to keep her busy, but I think the loneliness, I mean, we all know we were not made to be alone. I mean, that's just not our purpose. We weren't made that way. We were made to, belong and that sort of thing. And I think she was very much alone out there.
Well, so when did the alcohol issue really sort of take a hold of her? When did it become a real problem to the point where you guys decided to take action?
Well, when I came home from college, I noticed the biggest change. And I think because I didn't see her on a day-to-day basis, like I had before, is when I came home from college and I was like, whoa, this is different. This is, she's not the same person. And so I talked to my dad and he said, well, see what you can find out. I had never heard about AA or anything like that. I didn't, at the time I was 19. And so I happened, as luck would have it, one of my doctors was a recovering doctor. And I spent the day with him doing some photography for him for a kids recovery center, and did the typical when we were in the car of, hey, I've got a friend who I think mom has a problem with drinking, and where do I tell her to go and what do I tell her to do and everything else. And he also saw my mother as a patient, and he looked at me and he said, you're talking about your mother, aren't you? Well, the tears began and, I was like, yeah. And so he was really the key that unlocked all of the secrets that we needed as a family.
Do you think back then there was a terrible sort of stigma, almost a shame in even talking about it?
Oh, absolutely. I think the stigma and the shame has gotten better, but it hasn't improved enough that, I mean, it's still out there. I mean, everybody thinks of the alcoholic and the drug addict is the person in the curb on the road who's homeless and everything else. Well, the addict and the alcoholic is the painter and the teacher and the doctor and the radio host. It's the lawyers. It's everybody. There's no one profession that it hasn't touched. And we've got to change the way the public looks at it.
I'm so glad
And
you said that.
I mean,
Really
the
am.
opioid crisis has helped immensely, and I don't wish it on anybody. But still, the majority of the people who need treatment are alcoholics.
Yeah, it's there's sort of this when it comes to alcohol consumption. It doesn't, it's so ingrained in our life, right? I mean, you go to sporting events. I know they don't sell alcohol at college games, but you go to an NFL game and it's just part of the advertising. I know they're supposed to stop serving at halftime, but to be honest, it's not always a fun thing to do to go to an NFL football game. There's just so much alcohol going on. People are so out of control. I think that's why it's not so much fun to go as a college game.
Yeah, I mean, the tailgating. I mean, we all know what goes on. So, I do drink, but I don't drink a lot. But I've gotten very comfortable with going to functions and football games or basketball games or whatever it is. And why do you need it?
So I know your mom went to treatment. How long was she in treatment for?
She was in treatment about 6 weeks. She did 28 days, and then she got a pass and got to go home for the weekend because she was at Long Beach Naval Hospital. And so Long Beach is just a couple hours away from the desert. And, part of that was to see, well, how do you do at home? What's it like, the reentry process? And then she went back and spent a couple more weeks. We all went to family in different ways. I went to family there in Long Beach and then began working my own recovery process because I was just as sick as she was. And I didn't realize that until, I got a little bit of education about it.
Tell me what you mean by that. I don't know. Tell me when you say you felt that you were as sick as she was.
Well, I was the classic enabler. I covered up for her. When she couldn't go someplace with my dad, I would go with her. I never I did confront her on my own with her secretary at one point, which was a disastrous mistake. And then about 10 days later is when we did the family intervention. But I just covered for her and made it easy for her to do what she wanted to do. And that was to take pills. My mother didn't drink until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, she wasn't drinking all day long, but it was the prescription drugs that she was taking for the pain and everything else that it was the combination of the two of them together that made it so bad.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you make about the enabling because, I mean, we take calls in my office because we're only working with families whose loved ones have these issues. And a lot of the time if I've got a mum and dad on the phone because you're dealing with someone's child, and I use that word generically because I'm 52 and my mother still thinks I'm a little boy, and probably in some ways I am, but that's a whole other conversation. But, see, I told you your mother and my mother probably had a lot in common.
Yeah.
Typically it's somebody over 18, and what's going on is that one parent wants to be tough, and the other wants to enable. So I don't know if that's still. I mean, it's still something I see every on a pretty daily, weekly basis. So why do you think that is? I mean,
who wants to feel hurt? I mean, I still read my daily devotionals, and I'm like, darn, I'm still making that mistake. I mean, I get better at it. I'm definitely better at it. But, I love alcoholics because I am an organized person. I love to run their life. That's what I love to do. And so I'm a really good enabler, and I'm always working on changing and improving myself.
So how was your dad in all of this? I mean, was he, was he involved in the process of getting your mom into treatment? Was he, did he just sort of brush it aside? I mean, what was his response to all of this?
Well, once I met with the doctor and started to get some answers, then Dad met with the doctor and myself and my mother's secretary, and we began plotting behind her back, which is what you have to do an intervention. And then my dad realized that basically his way of dealing with it was to travel and be gone. So he really wasn't dealing with it. And then I would, dump on him because I was like, wait a minute, I can't do all this myself. So we all learned a new way to communicate. And it's just, let's be honest, let's say it with love. Doesn't have to, attack, and you don't have to be defensive and all of that stuff, but learn how to communicate with love. And it's hard sometimes, but Dad learned it too. And it made such a change in their marriage.
Because their marriage was really was some love affair. It really was, from everything I've read.
It was. I mean, they had a beautiful love affair, and they had been through hell and back, just the two of them, and much less with 4 kids who were far from perfect. So, but they really supported each other. And, it's very remarkable, but they learned how to communicate and communicate better.
So how was your mom after she got out of treatment, and really for the rest of her life? How was she? How did she do? You laugh. I'm interested to know why you laugh.
Well, I laugh because all she could talk about was her AA friends and her AA meetings and AA this and AA that. And I was like, there is more to life than AA. You have children. Now, great, we're all grown. We were grown and gone. But then I realized what it was like watching a rose slowly open, and she became this beautiful character. And my mother was a big prankster, and she had an incredible sense of humor, and she loved to do things like that. But it was just a matter of, she was so focused, because I think she was so afraid of relapse, that if I take the eye off the AA ball, I'm going to fail. And I don't want to fail to my family again. So, the first year I would say is a rough road for everybody, because everybody's trying to learn how to do it and do it differently and do it right and all that other stuff. And it just takes time, and everybody's got to work on it at their own pace.
So how did the clinic that's named after her, and the foundation, I think also that's named after, how'd that all come about?
Well, Eisenhower Medical Center had always planned on doing a drug and alcohol treatment center there in the desert. And Mother was on their board, and Leonard Firestone was on their board. And so they basically said, well, what if we name it after you? And she was like, oh, no. Because she only had, well, I can't do the math right now, but she only had 3 or 4 years of sobriety, which is very early in her sobriety. So they talked about it, and then she came and talked to us kids about it, because she said, I'm going to be long gone, and you're the ones, and your kids are the ones that are going to have to live with it. So that, we all went, so it doesn't bother us. I mean, we were proud of her sobriety and being so open and honest about it. So that was easy. And then my mother had visited Hazleton back when she was putting the Betty Ford Center together. And we based the Betty Ford Center's program after Hazleton's program, because they just celebrated 70 years, and they've been doing it a long time, and they know what they're successful. So the merger was an easy merger, and it's been great to be able to support each other, because the whole drug and alcohol business, because it is a business, is changing. And it's changing because of insurance and parity and all kinds of things.
Wow. So are you still involved with the clinic or the foundation these days? I know at one time you were, I think, right?
I'm on the board of trustees of the Hazleton Betty Ford Foundation. And I just returned from a board meeting up in Center City last week. So
So I want to ask you, because you got some really interesting photographs in the background there, and I couldn't help but notice there's one of your dad, I think when he was in the military. There's one a few years on, and and I've also seen a photograph of him, must have when he was playing at Michigan, because he was the starting center, and there's a photograph of him just ready to hike the ball, and well, he was quite the dashing young man, I must say.
Yeah, that's when he had hair. He had a lot of hair back then.
So what photographs do you have back there?
Well, this is in my guest room, and this is where my grandkids sleep because I want them to know who their family is. And so there is a picture of my dad in the military when he was a lieutenant commander. And then there's a young picture of my mother when she was a dancer, when she danced for Martha Graham. And then the postage stamp, there was a postage stamp that was done for Dad more than 10 years ago, don't ask me, but it's more than 10 years ago. And there are also pictures of my children and my grandchildren and, how we are a family.
Do you share the stories of your parents with your children and grandchildren?
I do. My oldest granddaughter is 13. And so we recently went to go see Miss Saigon together, and I hadn't seen it. And so when we were driving home, I was able to talk to her about the Vietnam baby lift. And because that's all when Miss Saigon is based upon, and the baby lift, and how her great grandfather was involved in that baby lift, and showed her pictures of Grandpa holding these Vietnamese babies that were orphans and that sort of thing. And then last Christmas, we did a Lego of the Capitol, which was a long day of doing Lego. And it's like 1,600 pieces. And so when we did it, I was like, okay, here's where great grandpa's office was, and here's the rotunda, because she was 6 months old when he died. But this is where he laid in state in his casket. And so things like that give me great opportunities to spend time, with my grandkids and talk to them about it.
So do you have like a couple minutes just to talk about the Willis Ward story?
Yeah. The Willis Ward story, Willis and Dad were roommates when they traveled. And so Michigan was going to play Georgia Tech. We're talking the 1930s.
I love this story.
And
it's a great story.
The Georgia people said that Willis Ward, because he was an African American, could not come on the field. And so Willis said fine, and Dad, was furious because he and Willis were friends.
And your dad was the captain of the team too, so.
He was the captain of the team. And Michigan was not having a very good year. I don't think they had even won a game at that point. And so my dad quit. And Willis came back to my dad and begged him and said, please, play for me. This is really important. And so my dad did play, and he was the center, number 48, which has been retired. And Michigan won the game. I can't remember the score, but they won the game. So, but Willis and my dad, there's pictures at the museum and library of Dad and Willis Ford. When we were putting the statue of Gerald Ford in the rotunda of the Capitol, because every state gets 2 statues, and Michigan had to bring home a statue before we could put a new statue in, but Gerald Ford is the only president from the state of Michigan. So anyway, the state House and state Senate were having a hard time passing it for some reason. I don't understand, but and there was a young African-American man who got up, who was a Democrat, who, lobbied for it to happen and to bring home Zachariah, whatever his name is. And it turns out that was Willis Ward's grandson.
That's amazing.
And so he now sits on our board of directors also. So it's another full circle. What goes around comes around once again.
I heard that story, and it just so resonated with me. I think it just spoke volumes about the kind of the before your father even got involved in politics, just the kind of man that he was. He was just really principled, and And what's interesting is, so the coach, Fielding Yost, there's, the ice arena is named after him, and, he's sort of a cult icon at Michigan. And then I heard the story, and I said, wow, how do they ever name the ice arena after this guy when he, he could have said to the coach at Georgia Tech, listen, these are my guys. They're either playing or we're not playing you. But he didn't. He capitulated to Georgia Tech, and Willis Ward didn't get to play in that game. So I thought it was interesting. And also I didn't realize this, but your dad was captain of 2 national championship teams at Michigan. I thought that was very interesting.
Yes.
So, wow, I'm so
character, put it that way.
He was. I'm so grateful that you took a little time out of your day. I was so excited to reconnect with you. And I don't know if you remember this, but after you spoke in D.C., I came up to you and I think I made a point of telling you that I was a Michigan grad. Yeah. Something I'm kind of proud of. So, thank you so much for coming on. And I don't know if there's anything we can do. If you're ever in Florida, maybe you'll let my partner and I take you to lunch or whatever. And is there anything I can do for you?
I appreciate that. Well, the biggest thing I want to try and get to next year, not this year, is I got to get back to Ann Arbor to a game. So. Yeah,
I went last year for homecoming, and it was the first time I had been back in many years, and I said, wow, I miss this. I miss being connected to the school. So I'm still hopeful that I'll get up there. I kind of want to go for the Notre Dame game because it's a night game, and I've never been in Ann Arbor for a night game. Because when I was in school there, which was the late 80s, they used to. It was when the stadium didn't look like a stadium. It was just they used to wheel these lights in, and they sort of stand over the over Michigan Stadium. Now we actually have a real stadium with real lights, and so they can have night games. So,
well, one of my very favorite memories during my dad's services and all of the things is when we left Washington after the service at the National Cathedral, and we're on Air Force One, and so we were headed to Grand Rapids. And the pilot took us to Ann Arbor and tipped the wings over the big house. And so we have a picture of Air Force One tipping the wings over the big house on our way into Grand Rapids.
It's amazing.
Yep.
I think this is the most moved I've been for any of the shows we've done, Jay. Just talking about Michigan. So thank you, Susan. It was really, really, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
And go blue.
Yes, go blue.
Thank you. So, folks, thank you. That was a moving show for me, just because people know how excited I am about being a Michigan Wolverine, and I think we might have to keep that flag in the background because I just get excited just seeing it on the screen. Anyway, don't forget to like us and subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, all the other platforms we're now on. If you need to get a hold of us, you can obviously find us on the web, drugandalcoholattorneys.com. You can email me, mark@drugandalcoholattorneys.com, or you can just call me, 561-419-6095, 24/7. So that's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. If you need help, please call us. And thanks again. Don't forget to tune in until next week. Very good. Wow.